We're effectively going to address a massive question of Jewish philosophy and mysticism, something that really sits at the core of everything that the Torah expects of us. And it all starts with a seeming innocuous and positive statement by Moshe Rabbeinu that is in this week's parasha. So it's a simple statement. It sounds like Moshe is giving us the most incredible bracha. And then you realize pretty quickly that it's not that simple. So, for context, the parasha that we're reading this coming Shabbos, please God, is Devarim. Devarim is the beginning of the final speech that Moshe would give to the Jewish people before he passed away. And in that time, as he speaks through the various events of the history of what they had experienced together, Moshe also uses this as opportunities to bless the Jewish people, to give them guidance, what we would call musar or toichacha, where he rebukes the Jewish people about certain things that they had done wrong or certain things that they may do wrong. And he also uses it as an opportunity to recall the history of what actually happened. We went here, we did this, we encountered those people, we had that experience, etc. We're going to look today at one of the brachas that Moshe gives to the Jewish people, and it's most appropriate, right? Before a person passes away, we see that Yaakov did the same thing. He blessed his children before he passed away. We're going to see it again right at the end of the Torah when we do Parashas V'zois HaBrocha, which is very much about the brachas that Moshe gives to the Jewish people, tribe by tribe. But the particular bracha that we're going to focus on today is a generic blessing that Moshe gives to the Jewish people. And it is a bracha that raises eyebrows from all the commentaries, from the Midrash, from Rashi, from the Gemara. There are a whole lot of questions about this particular bracha that Moshe gives to the Jewish people, because when you think about it, the bracha actually doesn't really seem to make sense. So this is what Moshe says to the Jewish people. He says, Yosef Hashem aleichem kochem elef pe'omim. Part one of the bracha, and this is all in one sentence, and that's really significant because when you have various details in the same sentence, that obviously implies that they're all connected to each other. So Moshe says to the Jewish people, Yosef Hashem aleichem kochem elef pe'omim. The first bracha that I want to give you is that Hashem should increase your numbers as you are today 1,000 times more. So at face value, basically what Moshe is telling he's telling the Jewish people, I want to give you a bracha that you should grow, that you should become a great nation, and to the extent that 1,000 times more the population than what you are today in the desert is the population that you should become in the future. But it doesn't stop there. Moshe continues, and he says, Vivorech eschem, and Hashem should bless you, ka asher diber lochem, as he has already said that he will bless you. Okay? So the two things in the pasuk. There's Moshe's personal bracha, I bless you 1,000 times increase, in addition to which he says, and Hashem should bless you as he has said that he would do. So the Midrash is probably the easiest one for us to work with, even though we see similar questions raised in the Gemara and raised by Rashi as well. Let's have a look at the Midrash. The Midrash says the Jewish people, you know how it is. You give the Jewish people brachas. Obviously we're going to say Amen. The truth is at the same time we'll also say, Nu, give us some more brachas. Why should we be satisfied just with one set of brachas? Give us more brachas. So the Midrash tells us that when Moshe blessed the Jewish people that they should grow 1,000-fold, the Jews said to Moshe, Rabbeinu Moshe, our great teacher, our great Rabbi Moshe, Atonoisen kitzva lebirchoseinu. Why are you putting a number? Why are you putting a finite extent to our bracha? Now look, 1,000 times is a massive bracha for anybody, by anybody's standards. 1,000-fold growth is a mega bracha. And yet there's this strange response from the Jewish people. They say, why are you limiting our brachas? So the Midrash tells us. The Midrash says, very often the Midrash will use a parable and will say the parable helps us to understand the concept. So the Midrash says, imagine the parable of a king, and the king has a son who's obviously the crown prince, and the king has to travel extensively, and he's going to be away from home for a long time. And at that time, the prince is very young. So the king doesn't want to leave the prince with a blank checkbook, even though he could. because the child doesn't have the maturity to know how to spend the money, etc. So the Midrash says that the king will then appoint somebody, what the Midrash calls an apatropa, which is effectively a custodian, and that person will be responsible to allocate a certain budget to the prince week by week or month by month during the time that the king is away. So at some point, the prince turns around to this custodian and he says, I don't get it. Why are you budgeting me? Why are you limiting how much money I have, how much I could spend, how much? My father's the king. We have wealth beyond what we would ever be able to spend. Why are you limiting me? So the custodian says, look, this is the budget I was given. This is how much I can allocate to you. When your father comes home, then he can splurge and he can give you as much of his wealth as he wants. Says the Midrash, it's exactly the same thing. Moshe says to the Jewish people, Zoi Misheli. This bracha that I'm saying, that you should increase 1,000-fold, that is the bracha that I can give you. I'm a person. I can give you that bracha, that you should increase 1,000-fold. Vivarech eschem kasher diber lochem, but then over and above that, Hashem will bless you as He can bless you. Now, remember the expression over here is ka'asher diber lochem, that Hashem is going to bless you as He has already said to you. So now we've got to think, where did Hashem already say to the Jewish people that He's going to bless them? And considering that Moshe's blessing is that there'll be 1,000 times more. So in all likelihood, we're looking for somewhere where Hashem blessed the Jewish people that they would expand and that they would grow. Where do we find that? Well, the most obvious place is back at the time of Avram Avinu, because Hashem promised Avram on more than one occasion that he would have a massive, massive nation that would come from his descendants. On one occasion, the way Hashem says it to Avram is that your children will be like the stars. And on another occasion, it says your children will be like the grains of sand at the seaside, that just as you cannot count the grains of sand, so you won't be able to count your children as well. In other words, effectively, Hashem has given a bracha to the Jewish people that we will grow to the point that we are beyond number. Now you can understand why the Jews were complaining. Jews were saying, Moshe, Hashem has already told our forefather Abraham that we're going to grow to a point that we are beyond number. Why then are you giving us a bracha that has a number, 1,000 times? To which Moshe replies, he says, that's my bracha. I have that budget. That's how much bracha I can give you for 1,000 times growth. And Hashem will bless you as He has promised to do so. So don't panic. It's not like you're not going to get your bracha. It's all good. Don't worry. I am blessing you with what I have the capacity to bless you, and Hashem will bless you with what He has the capacity to bless you. And it would appear that the Jewish people are satisfied with that explanation, and perhaps that's the end of the story. Except that there's one glaring problem with this entire story. And many of the commentaries ask this question because it really is so obvious. So, by way of introduction, there's a principle that the Gemara teaches us. The Gemara in Bava Kama teaches us a principle which is a very logical principle. The logical principle says this. Let's say that I would tell you, in 1 week from now, I'm going to give you a gift of what is called meya, 100 coins, right? Okay, so I'm a nice person, and I'm offering you a gift of 100 silver coins. It's worth a fortune of money. 1 week down the line, I come to your house, and I give you a pouch. And instead of 100 silver coins in the pouch, there are 200 silver coins in the pouch. Are you going to complain? Are you going to say that wasn't the deal? You told me you're giving me 100. Now you give me 200. No person in their right mind is going to say anything negative about it. They'll say, thank you very much. That's amazing. Because the principle the Gemara teaches us is Bichlal Mosayim Moneh. That if you have a quantity of 200, naturally it includes a quantity of 100. It's such a simple logical principle. You really didn't need the Gemara to tell it, right? So now let's apply that logic over here. Hashem has already blessed the Jewish people all the way back in the time of Abraham. Hashem blessed the Jewish people. You will be numerous as the stars and as the sand. And He says, Asher im yucholim nois ish. If it is possible for somebody to count the grains of sand that are at the beach, gam zaracho yimoneh, so it would be possible to count your people, your nation. In other words, the implication is that we will literally be so plentiful that in the same way as it's impossible to pick up every grain of sand and count it because there's just too many, that's how it's going to be with the Jewish people. Now, using the same logic, Bichlal Mosayim Mone. If 200 naturally includes 100, then surely a brocha that says you will be beyond number, that it will be impossible to count you, surely that also includes the possibility of growing to 1,000 times the size of your current population, right? Let's flip this around. How many Jews were there at this time? How many Jews were there? So we know the Torah just did a census 2 weeks ago in the parasha. We did a census and we worked out that there were 600,000 adult Jewish males. That means Jewish males between the age of 20 and 60. Simple mathematics will tell you that if you now include the senior citizens and the children and the women, a conservative guess puts the Jewish population at that time at 2 million people. Okay? 2 million people. In the world population of that time, 2 million was not a small amount. It was a significant population. Moshe blesses the Jewish people to be 1,000 times larger. That means to become 2 billion people. Now, in today's world population, if there were 2 billion Jewish people, that would be massive. That would influence the entire nature of our world in a completely different way. Nobody would complain about it. And especially when you consider that the world is only so big and it can only accommodate so many people. So 2 billion people would be a massive bracha. So there's 2 questions to ask over here. Question number 1 is, why are the Jews complaining? Moshe, you're limiting us to 2 billion people. What's the problem with that? 2 billion people is quite significant. And on the other hand, why does Moshe even have to say it if Hashem has already given a far bigger bracha, which is there'll be so many Jewish people that you won't even know how to count us? Why is Moshe wasting his breath giving a bracha that is actually insignificant compared to the bracha that Hashem had already given? Now, there are 2 possible explanations that the commentaries want to offer. We'll examine both of them, and then we'll see that there's a problem with both of them in context of this verse, particularly how Rashi explains it, and in context of another verse which is brought by the prophet Hosea. So let's look at the 2 possible explanations. One explanation that's given is there's a big difference between Moshe's promise or blessing and Hashem's promise or blessing. Generally speaking, the way that Hashem does things is He wants us to earn the brachas that He's going to give us. There are no free lunches in Hashem's world. There was one time in history when Hashem took us out of Egypt, that Hashem did even if we did not deserve it. And that's why it happened in the month of Nisan, the time of Pesach, where the energy of the year at that time is an energy of giving things that perhaps the people don't deserve. But ever since then, it's completely contingent on us. Hashem doesn't want to just hand out. So if we deserve it, we'll get Hashem's bracha, and if we don't deserve it, we won't. So people might wonder, hey, what happened to Hashem's bracha? You told Avram that we were going to be this massive nation that is beyond number, and the reality is that the Jewish population of the world, year on year, for almost our entire history, has been tiny. So what happened to your bracha? Well, the commentaries say that's because that bracha is dependent on our behavior. Moshe's bracha, which is significantly more reduced, only a maximum of 2 billion people ever, that bracha does not have the same restriction. Moshe's bracha is regardless. You will regardless eventually reach a point of being 1,000 times your current population. That's one explanation that the commentaries give. There is another explanation that quite a number of the commentaries give, including actually the Gemara in Sanhedrin. And that is, it depends when. Moshe is talking about how the reality of Jewish life will be in our current circumstances, what we call the Golus, when we're not in the Messianic age, and life is not yet in the perfection that Hashem expects for the world. Whereas Hashem's bracha, that we're going to explode into this mega nation that is impossible to count, that's only going to happen later when Mashiach comes. And by the way, the Midrash very much alludes to this, because the Midrash says, when the king comes back from his travels, then you'll have the full budget, alluding to the fact that it's something that is going to happen in the future. So, to answer our question, why Moshe would give a bracha that it apparently is already covered by a much larger bracha that Hashem gave, either it's because Moshe is offering the bracha without any conditions, or it's because Moshe is offering a bracha to tide us over until we are ready for Hashem's full-blown bracha. Those are the two possibilities that are brought in the commentaries. However, if you have a look, for example, at Rashi's explanation of this pasuk, Rashi indicates that both the bracha of Hashem and the bracha of Moshe happen simultaneously. Also, there's another verse, as I said. There's a pasuk in the book of Hosea, where the prophet Hosea says, again, it's a prophecy, V'hoya mispar b'nei Yisrael. The number of the Jewish people will be kechol hayom, like the sand of the sea, asher lo yimod v'lo yisofer merov, that cannot be measured and cannot be counted because of its abundance. Now, does anybody see the glaring contradiction between the first and second part of that pasuk? Let's do it again. Hosea starts off by saying, V'haya mispar b'nei Yisrael. The number of the Jews will be... ... How does the verse end? Asher lo yimod v'lo yisofer. It will be a number that can't be measured and can't be counted. Now make up your mind. Are the Jewish people going to have a number, in which case it's appropriate to start your prophecy by saying the number of the Jewish people will be X? Or is the message that the Jewish people are beyond number, which is why you say in your message, lo yimod v'lo yisofer, cannot be measured and cannot be counted? So, if we were to try and say, as the Gemara does, Mispar b'nei Yisrael, that when the Jews will have a number, that's if ein oisin retzono shel mokem. That's if we're not doing what Hashem wants. Lo yimod v'lo yisafer, when the Jews explode into this mega nation that cannot be counted, that is bisman she'oisin retzono shel mokem. That's when we are doing what Hashem wants. Okay, that's how the Gemara explains it, and that again breaks it into two different time periods or two different scenarios. But that Gemara actually also is quite problematic, because we already said that Hashem only gives us brachas when we're doing what Hashem wants. So how then is there a possibility of Hashem blessing the Jewish people with great number when we're not doing what Hashem wants, and with uncountable number when we are doing what Hashem wants? Surely we only get any bracha from Hashem when we're doing what Hashem wants. Something doesn't add up over here. Unless, of course, we're missing the point. And that's probably what the case is. And once we explore what we're missing, we're going to discover a whole dimension of this story which is beyond anything that we would have expected, not only in the interpretation of this particular pasuk, but something that would be beyond what we expect in our interpretation of the whole of the experience of Judaism. We're going to look at two principles. First, we're going to look at the principle of what does it mean to fulfill Hashem's will, because that's what the Gemara says. If we're fulfilling His will, then we get the big brachas, and if we're not fulfilling His will, we get the limited brachas. So let's understand what it means to fulfill Hashem's will. And then we'll look at a different principle of how there could be value in a finite experience, like Moshe's finite bracha, at the same time that there is already access to an infinite experience, like Hashem's infinite bracha. Those two principles should shape for us a whole different understanding of how we're supposed to view Judaism, our role in the world, the structure of the world, and how we're supposed to go about achieving what Hashem expects of us. So let's look at what does it mean to do Hashem's will. We have two choices. We could read this superficially, which is often what we do, or we could read it from a totally deeper perspective. Superficially, doing Hashem's will means you buy the items on Hashem's shopping list. So, for example, Mrs. Goldberg asks Mr. Goldberg to go to the shops and to buy milk, bread, I don't know what else, 15 items on a shopping list. Mr. Goldberg goes to the shops. He buys the 15 items, comes back home, and he has now done Ritzoino Shel Ishtoi. He's fulfilled his wife's will. I wanted 15 things from the shops. You got me 15 things from the shop. Great. We're happy. Now let's try something else. What happens if early on in their marriage, Mrs. Goldberg tells Mr. Goldberg that she really loves tulips? So Mr. Goldberg makes a mental note of the fact that his wife really likes tulips. And so every single Friday afternoon, without fail, he buys tulips. He also finds out which color is her favorite color. And so it's the same color and the same tulips every single Friday. At some point, she's going to turn around and say, do you really care about me? And he's going to say, what do you mean? I bring you tulips every Friday in your favorite color. In other words, he's saying, I am doing Ritzoinech. I'm doing your will. You want flowers. I'm bringing you flowers. You want specifically tulips. I'm bringing you tulips. You want that color. I'm bringing you that color. And she's thinking to herself, the truth is that flowers, even if they're my favorite flowers, are only representative of a relationship. I don't want the flowers. I want the sentiment that those flowers are supposed to represent. Now, the flowers are finite. You get a bunch of flowers, it lasts for X amount of days. By the next week, you can get another bunch of flowers to replace those flowers. The Ratzoin, the real meaningful connection that the woman is looking for in the relationship and why she wants the flowers, that meaningful connection is not limited to flowers. And it's really not just the responsibility, but it should be the privilege of the man to find that meaningful sentiment that goes beyond flowers. It's bigger than flowers. In other words, we should never confuse a to-do list with Ratzoin. A to-do list is an action item list. Ratzoin is what you want in life. So in order to fulfill what you want in life, you may have a whole lot of to-do lists, and you may even have things that don't fit on a to-do list. Now, it's exactly the same in our relationship with Hashem. In our relationship with Hashem, we get to choose one of two possible ways that we could relate to God. The one, and possibly the most common way, is Hashem has a to-do list. On that to-do list, every single day, there are a whole lot of items. I've got to say Modani when I wake up. I have to wash my hands. I have to put on my clothing in a particular way. I have to say the morning blessings. I have to daven. In the case of a man, I have to put on tefillin. I have to give tzedakah. I have to make sure the food I eat is kosher. I have to make sure that I say a bracha over the food. And so it goes through the course of the day. If it's a different date on the calendar, today is Shabbos, there's a different to-do list for a Shabbos. If it's Yom Tov, there's a different to-do list depending on which Yom Tov it is. So we could go through life with all of these to-do lists and that way believe that we're fulfilling Hashem's Ratzoin. Now we've got to ask ourselves an honest question. What does Hashem want? Does Hashem want us checking off items on a list? Or does Hashem want us to invest ourselves in a meaningful relationship with Him? Well, when you put it that way, it's quite self-evident what Hashem wants. So we get to choose now. Is our interaction with Hashem very finite? Very limited to things, to tasks, to dates, to functions? Or is our relationship beyond those tasks and beyond, not that we don't, God forbid, do those tasks, using the excuse and the cover story that I have a meaningful relationship with Hashem, because that's a non-starter. You can't start a relationship that ignores the to-do lists, right? You can't go to the shop and come back with nothing that was on the shopping list and say, but I love you anyway, and expect that that's going to fly. So we start with the lists and then we expand beyond the list and say, so where am I in this story? Not just what am I doing, where am I? Where are we in our relationship with Hashem? Is it all just calibrated and mandated and following a particular schedule? Or is there something greater than what could fit on a list? So when the Gemara talks about doing Hashem's will, or not doing Hashem's will. The Gemara is not talking about being observant or not being observant. It's talking about how much are we connected with what Hashem wants, with the sentiment, with the personal investment, with the soul investment, and how much are we just simply going through the motions. If we go through the motions, we have a finite Judaism. If we have a finite Judaism, we can expect finite blessings from Hashem, or in this case from Moshe. Moshe says, Meshali, if you want a finite connection to your Judaism, I am a finite person, so I can give you finite brachas. But if you want an infinite connection to Hashem, then you're going to have to step out of that comfort zone and do more than what is expected, for which Hashem will give you brachas that are way beyond what I could ever imagine or even articulate. Now, the Alter Rebbe explains that when it comes to serving Hashem, Torah and mitzvahs is considered the finite approach, and teshuvah is the infinite approach. Because Torah and mitzvahs, you can't add to the mitzvahs. You can't put on tefillin twice in a day and say, well, now I'm doing more for God. You can't get up in the morning and say, Modani, an extra time so that you're doing more for God. It's finite, it's fixed. There's a time, there's a scope. That's how you do the mitzvah, and that cannot change. However, teshuvah is not just because a person's done a sin and now they have to beat their chest and say, I was so terrible. Teshuvah is about wanting to reconnect, acknowledging that my neshama is really part of God, and now I want to reconnect. I want to have this meaningful depth of experience of God. And in order to get there, I'm going to do things that are beyond just simply what is required. And that's why, for example, one of the things that we're told about teshuvah is that it's bechela yatir. It has a tremendous passion associated with it. So I can't put on tefillin an extra time, but I could invest so much of myself in the experience of tefillin that it becomes a more energetic, more energized, more passionate experience. That's what teshuvah does. So what Hashem and Moshe are telling us is that in the experience of Judaism, we get to select at any time with any mitzvah that we're doing, if we're going to plug in just to the simple finite human experience, or if we're going to escape the limits of the human and have this massive spiritual experience, which is called teshuvah or represented by teshuvah. If our connection has its finite limits, the bracha that it generates has finite limits. If our connection breaks free of those finite limits, then our bracha also breaks free of those finite limits. Now, let's examine this a little bit better. Because the truth of the matter is, even when we do a mitzvah, even though the mitzvah has its finite elements to it, the reality is a mitzvah is not a finite experience. Now, it's hard for us to imagine exactly what that means. For example, in the book of Tanya, the Alter Rebbe speaks about the fact that when you do a mitzvah, the mitzvah creates a yichud, it creates a bond between us and Hashem. And he says, "Hayichud hazeh l'maylo hu nitzchi le'olam va'ed." The action that we perform on earth lasts for a period of time, a set period of time. So there may even be a mitzvah that takes 1 minute to fulfill, or even less. But the yichud, the bond that is created between the soul and Hashem via that mitzvah, lemaila, in the upper reality, which is the truest reality, is nitzchi le'olam va'ed, is absolutely infinite. It's absolutely eternal. Or to put it differently, when we do a mitzvah, we're not living in the human world anymore. We're living in Hashem's world. When we study Torah, we're not living in the human world. We're living in Hashem's world. Now let's understand what that means. The definition, the truest definition of Torah is not a code book for Jewish living, an ethical guide, a mixture of history, philosophy, mysticism, and law. The truest definition of Torah is Chochmosoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, divine wisdom. That is the truest definition of Torah, divine wisdom. The truest definition of a mitzvah is not a part of our heritage or a tradition that we follow or what keeps us Jewish. The truest definition of a mitzvah is Retzoinoi shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the will of Hashem. Now, in the human experience, you could divorce the person and their wisdom, or the person and their will. For example, a person might go through a period in their life where all they want is a particular thing. There's a particular objective that they're chasing, a particular goal that they want to achieve, a particular ambition that they're following. And because that is their ratzon, that becomes their focus. It could even become their obsession. That's where they throw all their resources. That's where they spend all their time. That's what they think about. And then it is possible that a couple of years down the line, that will no longer be relevant in their life at all. And they'll now have a new ratzon, a new ambition, and a new objective, and even a new obsession. And that now consumes them totally. Because a person and their ratzon are not fundamentally the same thing. There's a person who has ratzon, a person who wants certain things, even if they want it very, very deeply. And the same thing applies to a person and their wisdom. So it's quite possible to do the Tim Noakes thing, where you spend X amount of years of your life absolutely convinced that the way you have understood the human metabolism and biology is X, and therefore the best diet to follow is that diet, and write best-selling books and become a very successful person. And then a few years down the line, come to the conclusion that all of that was wrong and come up with a whole different understanding of the human biology, and based on that, a new book and a new approach and a new system, and become famous all over again, because we're not married necessarily to the things that were our wisdom at one particular point in time. And it's possible for a person to shift, and it's possible for a person, God forbid, to reach a stage in their life where their wisdom no longer works. God forbid a person has some kind of a serious brain injury or a debilitating disease, and now their mind cannot work as it used to. And the reality is they are still the person they were, with all the value of being that person, in spite of the fact that such an important function isn't functioning anymore. That's not the case with Hashem. With Hashem, the expression is Hu v'chochmosoi echad. Hashem and his wisdom are one and the same entity, or to borrow the expression that both the Rambam and subsequently the Maharal use, which is Hu ha'yodea v'hu ha'yodua v'hu ha'mada. That Hashem is the knower, the information that is known, and the intellect that knows the information. You cannot split Hashem into different parts. Therefore, if Hashem is absolutely infinite, which means that Hashem is beyond definition, beyond description, beyond comprehension, then so is his wisdom. When we open up a book of Torah, we're accessing at that point in time divine wisdom, which fundamentally is beyond description and beyond comprehension. And it's only because Hashem is so benevolent that he has packaged some of that wisdom in language that you and I can understand. But we need to know and acknowledge that whatever little bit of understanding, which to us is this immense wow, is not the beginning of an infinite journey, because there's infinite wisdom within the Torah. And it's the same thing with a mitzvah. Every time that we do a mitzvah, Hu uratzoinoi echad. Hashem and his will are one and the same. Just as he is infinite, so is his will infinite. The mitzvah I do is far from infinite. It has a particular size, a particular time of day or time of year when it applies. Some mitzvahs are for men, some mitzvahs are for women. Some mitzvahs can only be done in Israel. There are a whole lot of limiting factors, and yet within that, the reality of the mitzvah is absolutely infinite, undefined, beyond comprehension, beyond limits, beyond description. To put that into simple language, Hashem has devised a system where we, humans living on earth, can, whenever we choose to, plug straight into infinity with a capital I. That which cannot be defined, that which cannot be understood, and quite frankly, that which our world can never contain. Until Mashiach comes and then the rules change. But our world cannot handle that kind of infinite energy. And that takes us to the most compelling question of all in this whole conversation. Why would Hashem design the system that the goal is to connect with that which is absolutely infinite, and then say that the only way you could ever access that infinite value is to be finite and restricted as a human on earth? Surely it would have made a whole lot more sense to say, let's have beings that have no restrictions, that live in a non-physical environment, that don't have a shape, that don't get tired, that don't need to eat, that don't have a limited human comprehension, and let those beings connect with the infinite. It makes no sense to put us plunk down here on this earth, which is spiritually claustrophobic, with huge limitations on our understanding, on our energy levels, on our capacity for empathy, etc., and then tell us that we are the ones responsible to plug into the infinite. It doesn't seem to make sense. Or, to put it back into the language of our conversation, it doesn't make any sense that if Hashem is already giving infinite brachas, why would there be any value in an individual called Moshe giving a finite bracha? What is the value of anything finite if the goal and the mainframe and the objective is all infinite? That's probably the largest question, the most compelling question in the whole of Judaism. It's the reason why so many people turn around and say, do you honestly think that? Do you honestly think that God cares how long I wait after I've had a steak before I have ice cream? Do you honestly think God cares if I bring in Shabbos at 6:03 or 6:08? Do you honestly think Hashem cares if the letters in my mezuzah are somewhat malformed? It doesn't make any sense that such a giant, powerful, infinite God should be caught up in such little things. Of course it doesn't make sense, because God is not bound by what makes sense. We have the need for things that make sense. Let's not limit Hashem to our comfort zone, because when things make sense, then we are good with them, and then we feel comfortable. So we need things to make sense to satisfy ourselves. Let's not drag Hashem down into the limits of the human experience and say, well, if it doesn't make sense, surely he wouldn't have wanted it that way. Hashem fundamentally operates in a reality that makes no sense. Now, the truth is, infinite or undefined God makes sense. It makes complete sense that Hashem should be beyond anything that the finite world could be able to describe, because he's not of this world, he made this world. So it actually makes perfect sense that Hashem should be beyond, greater than, higher than our world. But Hashem being infinite or undefined means that Hashem is not bound by that which is beyond sense, just as he is not bound by that which makes sense. In other words, if I would come up with any description of anything that says, aha, now I've got it, now I've explained how Hashem works, and it all makes logical sense, then I would have missed the point fundamentally. So where will I find Hashem in his realist sense, in his realist state? In a paradox, where nothing makes sense, because he is beyond sense. He is beyond logic. He is beyond definition. So when I find a reality of absolute paradox, where there's a value to a bracha that is finite at the same time that there's a value to a bracha that is infinite, then I have connected with Hashem's essence. When I see the value in a mitzvah that has such strict parameters of the physical world and yet is a portal of connection to the infinite world, that is where I'm analyzing and connecting with Hashem, because it's beyond the rules of both sides of the reality. It's beyond the rules of the finite reality as it is beyond the rules of the infinite reality. So, Hashem tells us, and this is described beautifully in a Midrash, the Midrash Tanchuma on Parashas Nosoi. Hashem tells us that the goal of all of this is that he wants to have a home in the lowest possible reality. A home in the lowest possible reality. So we've got to analyze every part of that statement. Firstly, what do we mean by a home? Home is a place where we are not bound by anybody's rules or expectations. We don't have to conform. We could just be us. That's home. Hashem, in the spiritual realms, conforms to the rules that he has created for the spiritual realm. And in the physical world, he conforms to the rules that he has created for the physical world. So in order to be at home means that Hashem will manifest without any rules at all. And yet he wants that to happen in a place that is very much structured out of rules. In other words, the ultimate goal for Hashem is the infinite within the finite, where the finite is no longer finite, yet it is finite all at the same time, and the infinite is completely beyond and completely within all at the same time, and it makes no sense to any of us. And that's its greatness, because it takes us to a reality beyond ourselves. Hashem wants a reality where a tiny little mitzvah that takes a fraction of a moment to do with very limited resources generates an infinite outcome. And it still remains a tiny instant in time with very finite physical resources. Hashem wants a reality where a human being pushes the limits of what humans can push. 1,000 times growth. That's what Moshe says. Moshe says, let's push our limits, because the number 1,000 in all Jewish literature represents where you go as far as you can possibly go. Do the very best that you can possibly do. That's what Hashem wants. And then Hashem will plug into our efforts a result that is infinite, a result that we could never have dreamed or imagined. That's what's happening over here in this parasha. Moshe says Hashem's bracha only has value once we do our part. Hashem's bracha could be a gift to us, but that's not what he wants. He wants us to earn our keep. So he says, you push to the degree of 1,000. You push to the max of what you could do as a person, so that I can then gift you with something which is totally beyond you, something which is totally infinite, so that the infinite can live in your finite endeavors. And that's what Judaism is about. It's about living in the finite world, doing finite things as mandated by the Torah, with a tremendous sentiment of saying, I'm going to push myself to do those finite things with the optimum input, the number 1,000, as Moshe blesses us. And then Hashem puts into that his bracha, which has no limits at all, so that we live here on earth with the experience of Hashem's absolute infinite essence. And that is something that we're constantly constructing every time we do a mitzvah, although we'll only get to really experience it in our own lives at the time of Mashiach's arrival, which of course we daven every single day should happen literally in the next instant.